All right. So we're at 319.
Yep.
All right. For those joining us today, we're still talking about Hegel's philosophy of nature and slogging it through the essential or middle section of the book. I'm going to go ahead and read 319, and then we're going to start talking about this stuff. So 319, the different densities which determine the visibility of objects and which exist in different media, air, water, glass, etc., are in the first instance only externally compared and unified. In the nature of crystals, this comparison is internal. Crystals have, on the one hand, a general transparency, but on the other hand, they possess in their inner individualization their basic structure, uh, uh, Kerngestalt. If you think of the word kernel, like this, this the kernel of this issue, like the center of it. That's what it's trying to get at there. Basic structure, a form deviating from the exact formal likeness to which this general transparency belongs. This form is also shape as basic structure, but it is likewise an ideal, subjective form which, like specific gravity, actively determines space. It consequently also determines spatially manifest visibility in a specific fashion distinct from the first, abstract transparency, double refraction. And so we have, you know, uh, I think like the previous sections where they talk about space and how space has sort of this abstract form or this abstract being, right? So you start to structure what space is, and we already went through this section weeks and weeks ago. And I think they're starting to talk about matter in the same way. Like matter can be thought of abstractly, but it also has an external look to it as well as an internal shape. And he's talking about its internal shape in terms of what structures it internally. And he's given the name crystals to the internal structure to try to give more than just a blank, white board. Rather than that, in, instead of an imagined like blank slate for whatever this matter is, right? This density, uh, of objects or whatever, the inner structure is more complicated, and that's kind of what he's starting to get at here. You said it, we're still in light, you said, right?
Yeah, we're still going through like this is light as it's passing through a medium, right? The medium of the crystal,
Yeah,
and the sh
yeah,
inner shape of the crystal starting to have an impact on it. So it's kind of being deterministic of itself.
right. And the differing structures, like there's a different structure to air, different structure to water, different structure to glass, and as light passes through it, you can tell that it's affected in different ways, and they're not all the same. They all have different structures, and I think that's what he's starting to talk about with 319. And I'll just and there's the remark. I'll be right back. I'm here.
Yep. No problem. I was actually looking something up I meant to look up before, just to see if I remember this correct. Oh, that's right. So honest, just a quick thing that was reminding me of the double refraction. I thought it was interesting because this science educator also was, PhD, doctorate in physics. In order to emulate the delayed choice quantum eraser, which again seems to be a honestly to this point does seem to be a critique again back on how physics has determined its understanding of what it's talking about is wrong. Use double refraction as a way of doing that particular experiment at home because it equally, basically almost exactly halves the light. Um, right, yes, for this point, the category force could be appropriately used. It's a rhomboidal form, which is the most usual among the forms deviating from exact formal likeness of shape. So force, it still has four sides to it, just it's not straight, 90 degrees. individualizes the crystal internally through and through, but if the crystal is not accidentally split into lamella, which by the way, I found that that means, plates, like, you cut up a rock into small plates, that's that. Does not come into existence as shape, but does not in the least interrupt or disturb the perfect homogeneity and transparency of the crystal, but operates only as an immaterial determinant. It's immaterial, so it's because it's kind of not just of the matter itself, but it's the shape inside. It's the way the matter itself interacts. I'm trying to. And it does not come to existence as shape. It's not in the. Okay, at this
Well, no, if you
abstract
think about
layer.
the light going through
Yep,
the structure,
I'm
it's an
overthinking it again.
yeah, it's
Yep.
an immaterial determinateness, and so yeah, and so um
Yeah,
yeah,
I was reading, I think it's in the edition here, there was a theory. It was the light was doing that because of the cracks and crevices inside the material, which is like, no, kind of just sort of that exact thing. It is a material determinist, which is not what this is.
yeah.
Um, Again, he really likes, again, Goth here. Uh, in its form as internally active terms. I can quote nothing more than apostate than Gauss's description of the relation between the external apparatus of two mutually facing mirrors and the phenomena of entropic colors produced in the interior of a glass cube placed between them. Why have I never looked that up? I think that's the kind of color smear effect. The prismatic color smear. In one of his books, Ghost says apropos of natural, transparent, crystallized bodies that nature has constructed in the innermost part of such bodies a mirroring apparatus exactly like that we have with an external physical mechanical means, interior damask web woven by nature. Yep. So showing a similar relationship that the mirrors are able to emulate. However, in this correlation of outer and inner, it is not, I repeat, a question of refraction mentioned previously, but of an external double mirroring, oh, of this paragraph, but external double mirroring, the phenomena corresponding it to the crystal's interior. So they're saying it's not the same thing, even though it's got similar. Oh, sorry. Okay. Similar distinction should be made in regard to what is said in the same work. It could quite distinctly be observed in a meridian of ice spar. The varying lie of the layers and consequently interplay of reflection were the most immediate cause of the phenomena. This paragraph script was, so to speak, rhomboidal force or activity, not with the action of existent lamellae. All right, so be, this paragraph.
The Zuzats may give more of a clue
Yeah, I was
on a
trying to
lot
think
of
about
this.
that. It's showing how it's internal, but we're concerned more about the abstract relationship that this is mirroring, not the literal action of said spar, not the actual mechanism of double refraction, just the conception, the abstraction. That's what I was trying to figure out how exactly phrase that because it seemed contradictory at first. Of course, was it talking about how double refraction I showed last week, where you kind of have that split. Ones can be almost directly straight up, while the other's off to the side, or it's kind of a V shape. And so they say that's the second refraction, the part of the double refraction. The molecule integrantes do not therefore have the form of a cube or double pyramid. They're two different positions, so two images, but in a single shape. For since this shape is on one hand passive to light, it lets the image freely through, but its materiality then equally has an influence throughout the whole internal of the individual body. Okay, I'm just trying to see if I highlighted anything. Okay. Did not there Yeah, so it's while it's still not impacting the light, it's still having enough it's still letting light through clearly. It has an effect on the light because it's been refracted. Goethe brooded a great deal over this phenomenon, which he attributed to fine fissures in the crystal to existent lamella. This place is not, however, produced by fissures, but only by interior shape. For when actual discontinuities are present, colors too at once make their appearance. There are other bodies through which one sees a line not merely as doubled, but even in two pairs. Recently, many more bodies have been discovered exhibit double refraction. Here too belong the phenomena called fata morgana in the French mirage, in which off the seashore an object is seen double. Yeah, that's more air difference induced. I mentioned that last
So let
time.
me ask you this.
Hmm.
When he talks about double refraction, is he talking about the fact that you can see light by itself as well as light through the structure through which it's
Um,
traveling?
in a way, it's called double refraction. It's more like you have light that goes out this way and comes back. Kind of like gravitational lens is double refraction.
Okay. All right.
And so essentially, you're seeing the same light roughly come from the same source from two different directions.
Okay.
And so that's why the mirage simple example works pretty well because you're seeing the same object twice. It's literally just the doubling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess yeah, that gravitational lensing would be double refraction at least, if not more than that, because there's quad ref one of the big pictures now has like four pictures of the same galaxy.
Ah, okay. All right. Double refraction is an optical phenomenon that occurs when light splits into two rays after entering a transparent substance.
Yeah. So
So it'd
it
be like the
refracts
Dark
out.
Side of the Moon album.
Yeah. And prism is an example of double refraction. Right.
There it is. Okay.
Is that sometimes that light can come back to itself, which is what the
Right.
mirage part is. Or come back together at an opposite at a later point. Yeah, so the light gets split in half kind of thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. So 320, this immaterial being for self force of form developing into interior existence supersedes the neutral nature of crystallization, and we now have the determination of the immanent punctiform principle, brittleness, and with it cohesion in a still perfect but formal transparency. Brittle glass, for example. I feel like I've read this before.
Yep.
This moment of brittleness is different from self-identical manifestation from light and illumination. It is therefore the inner beginning or principle of darkening, not as yet existent darkness, but its active principle. It is a familiar fact that brittle glass, through perfect transparency, is the condition for the entoptic colors.
I think that's the rainbow color smear.
Okay,
That's what I think that means.
okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Darkening does not remain a mere principle, but in contrast with the simple indeterminate neutrality of shape, and apart from darkening and lessenings of transparency due to external and quantitative causes, it develops into the abstract, one-sided extreme of compact solidity, of passive cohesion, the metallic principle. Thus, the dark element, dark side of the moon. Wow. Thus, the dark element and the bright element, each separately existent are at the same time posited through the intermediation of transparency in a concrete and individualized unity, the manifestation of color.
It is interesting to think about color, especially because like in it's not just color theory. Like when you set a color in a computer, you got to set the hue, then you got to set the brightness to make a color. And so the color itself is some it's kind of the dark element because it's the negation of the brightness in the light. So it's color is the determinacy of the light, but this also makes it well the opposite of bright is dark. So that's kind of interesting way of thinking about it. Let's see here. Yeah, there is abstract darkness is the immediate opposite of light as such, but the dark element first becomes real as physical, individualized corporeality. The process of darkening just indicated is this individualization of the bright elements. Okay. Yeah, there it is. In this example here of the transparent body of being manifestation in the sheer of shape, culminating in the being for self or individualized matter. Transparency is homogeneous in neutral existence. The dark element is matter individualized within itself to the point of being for self, which, however, does not exist punctiformally. So I guess if I think like how everything sort of interpenetrated, but only as a force as opposed to brightness, and for that reason just as capable of perfect homogeneity. Which again, that does seem interesting. It is well known that all the metallic principle in the material principle of all coloring, one can call it universal pigment if one likes. Only the high specific gravity metals is here relevant, and it's a preponderant particularization of the specific matter concentrates itself in extreme intensity as the against the unlocked inner neutrality of the transparent shape. In the sphere of chemistry, what is metallic is equally one-sided different base. Okay. Saying again here, we're not talking about color chemically, just as light. Well, I did at the point, transparency is homogeneous, and so of course the dark elements must itself, which is a determining factor of the body, it's a force against brightness. So color is a result of the force of the, I guess, increasing determinateness of the body against light. And it can be in different spectrum. Yeah. I'm too starting to think ahead, but again, color is the opposite of brightness, so in setting forth the process of darkening in the preceding paragraph, it was important that besides enumerating its moments abstractly, one should state the empirical ways in which these moments are manifested. Obviously, there are differences in each case, but physics creates even more. Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to find. Yep, there it is. Oh, that's what I highlight. But physics creates even greater difficulties for itself by mixing up determinations or properties belonging to quite different spheres. Important as it is to find out the simple, specific determinants among all the various conditions and circumstances associated with the general phenomena like heat, color, etc., it is just as important, on the other hand, to bear in mind the differences bound up with the manifestation of such phenomena. Again, like electricity and magnetism, yeah, they're bound together in electromagnetism, but they're also still electricity and magnetism. In empirical science, any statement as to what color or heat, etc., is cannot be based on the notion, but must depend on their modes of origin. These modes are, however, extremely varied, but the craze for finding only general laws leads to neglect of essential differences, while an abstract viewpoint leads to chaotic lumping together of the most heterogeneous substances, as e.g., gases, sulfur, metals, etc. in chemistry. Thus, the failure to consider modes of action as particularized by the differing media and spheres in which they occur must have been prejudicial to the very desire to discover general laws and determinations. The circumstances connected with the manifestation of color are lumped together in this chaotic fashion, and experiments tied to the most specialized conditions are usually opposed to the simple general conditions, the archetypal phenomena in which nature of color reveals itself as an unprejudiced intelligence. The confusion attached to a procedure which makes such a show of precise and well-grounded experiment, while is in fact crude and superficial, can only be countered by taking account of differences in the mode of origin of phenomena. One must know what these differences are, and one must keep them apart in their distinctive characters. And I was
This
just
feels
gonna,
really familiar. I feel like we covered this. You might have backed up.
no, this is
No?
a repeat from a higher level of him critiquing Newton,
Okay.
because we definitely did not read this.
Okay.
No.
It's just, I think he's just retreading ground from a newer layer,
Yeah. Okay.
because he definitely lays into Newton again here.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah,
Yeah.
first of all,
Didn't Newton have like a theory of color that was,
like I think he went through light in terms of corpuscles. Like,
Yeah, he
yeah,
had
he
a
had a theory
particle
of
theory of light.
the five or seven colors that are mixed together,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. All right. I remember that. Okay.
which is going to show up
Vaguely.
here anyways. First of all, one must be convinced of the fundamental principle that loss of brightness is bound up with specific gravity and cohesion. And again, just sort of the shape of the body shape. Yeah. These determinations
Yeah.
are in contrast to the abstract identity of pure manifestation. Light as such, the peculiarities and specifications of corporeality. So again, comparing the universal to the particular. Beyond these determinations, matter retreats further into itself and into the dark. These determinations directly constitute the advance from condition to free individuality, and they appear here in the relation to the former to the latter. The interesting fact about the entropic colors is that the darkening principle, which here is brittleness, is an immaterial punctiform determinist, active only as a force, which exists outwardly and produces opacity when a transparent crystal is reduced to powder. Another example is froth on a transparent liquid and the like. Pressure in a lens, which gives rise to epoptic colors, is an externally mechanical alteration of specific gravity alone, which there is no division in Lemuel or such existent objects to transparency. Yeah, again, using mechanical thing to affect the density of the lens itself,
Yeah.
which leads to the bend, yeah, to the spectrum. When metals are heated, alteration of specific gravity, their surfaces exhibit a fleeting succession of colors which can be even be arrested at will. The chemical determination of color, which I'm not sure what the underlying color for that is, or reason for color in that. The chemical determinations of color by acid, however, involve an entirely different principle of the lightening of darkness, or of a more imminent self-manifestation of fiery activity. Yeah, definitely a different beast than this.
We
In
all love
considering
fiery activity.
in considering colors as such, we should in the first instance exclude any lessening of transparency, any darkening or brightening due to chemical action. For the chemical substance, like the eye, in the subjective, now we have the individual, like the eye is, yeah, I think I highlighted here because he is talking about all three sides of the syllogism in one paragraph here. Like the eye, then the subjective physiological phenomenon of color is a concrete entity containing many other determinations, and those connected with color cannot be definitively identified and isolated. On the contrary, the discovery of anything in the concrete object connected with color presupposes a knowledge of color in the abstract. The preceding remarks refer to inner darkening insofar as this belongs to the nature of a body. It is interesting to demonstrate this darkening in connection with color since the dimness it produces does not exist in an externally independent fashion and cannot therefore be pointed out in that way. But even an external dimming is not diminution of light as such, e.g., through distance. An obscuring medium which exists externally is simply less transparent, merely translucent. A quite transparent medium like water or clear glass, the element of air lacks the concreteness present even in neutrality in unindividualized water, begins to lose transparency as a result of a thickening of the medium, especially if the number of layers, i.e., of discontinuous boundaries, increases. The most celebrated means of producing external obscuration is the prism, whose dimming action stems from two factors. First, from its outer boundary as such, its edges, and secondly, from its prismatic shape. From the variable transverse diameter between the whole spread of one side and the opposite edge. I'm assuming he specifically means a triangular prism here, as that's the most common one for these experiments. Among the incomprehensible features of color theories is the fact that men have ignored a prism's property of lessening transparency, and in particular of doing so unevenly according to the varying thicknesses of the diameter of the different parts through which the light passes. Which I'm just trying to think it interesting here, because yeah, when you're spreading out the light, you're actually dimming it in another way too, because it's less light. The light is gets spread out. But that's me throwing empirical onto this. Darkening, however, is only one factor, brightness is the other. Color requires a more precise determination of their relationship. Light illuminates, the day dispels darkness. A dim or dull light, a simple mixture of light with existent darkness, yields, in general, a gray. But in color, these two determinations are in such a relationship that while they are held asunder, they are just as much posited in unity. They are separate, and yet each also shows in the other. Is that what I was trying to? Yeah, that okay. They are separate. Such relationship is to be called an individualization. A similar relation was demonstrated in connection with so-called refraction. But I think I was trying to think at that point. Such a relationship is to be called an individualization. Something that comes out as individual, both through the being, different and yet the unity of what that means at the same time. I think it's another interesting kind of visualization for me in how the universal in particular determine individuality. Right there. Because it's how both color is both the darkness, the hue, and then the brightness together. They're both different, but the same time, both the differences and the unity. It's the identity of identity and difference again, in yet a different way. I think it's more even more nuanced for me. Anyways, so a similar relation was demonstrated in connection with so-called refraction, where one determination is active in the other and yet has its own separate existence. It is the way the notion as such, which as concrete contains moments in their difference and at the same time in their ideality, their unity. This determination, which makes Ghost's expression hard to grasp, is expressed by him in the sensuous manner appropriate to it. He says that in the prism, the bright overrides the dark, or vice versa, so that the bright, though modified by the dark, still acts independently qual bright, though dimmed, and in the case of the prism, disregarding the common displacement, remains in its own place at the very time of its displacement. Not sure what I just said either. Where the bright or dark, or rather the brightening or darkening agent, the two terms are relative, exists independently in an obscuring medium, this medium, when set in front of a dark or bright background, and so serving to brighten or darken the latter, maintained its characteristic appearance as is an intensively bright or dark as before. The one is posited as negating the other, and so both are posited as identical.
Yeah,
Is it?
he's trying to describe in words what happens when refraction happens and the light is darkened and then the dark is lightened through the prism or some other medium that the light's going through, and like what that looks like. And it comes up unless you have the concrete, like halfway down the page, he starts to focus what he's talking about into the prism and saying, well, this is what the prism does, right? And so from there, you can suddenly it comes into focus in your mind as a concrete object, as opposed to the process, which he's trying to describe the process that happens rather than
Yeah.
the medium first and then say this is what the medium is
So
doing, because it's not really the medium doing it, because it's an interaction of the light with the thing.
yeah, it's kind of almost also has that kind of wave interference pattern kind of implication in that.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, with gravitational forces, where like there
Yeah.
isn't a prism, right? Like a solid object, but gravitational forces,
Oh, I was
it's
thinking,
it's even
yeah,
harder to yeah.
yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Hmm. But yeah, sort of
Yeah.
you have the interference where the positive cancels the negative and vice versa. Yeah. All right, so you can get interference, positive interference for light, negative, yeah. Okay, and let me get this set back up. This way, the difference between color in mere gray is to be crass, though in this e.g., a merely gray colorless shadow is perhaps more rarely met with that than is supposed. The difference is the same as that between green and red in the color square. Green is the mixture of the opposed colors, blue and yellow, while red is their individuality. That's definitely an older stuff I don't remember. On Newton's familiar theory, white light, i.e., colorless light, consists of five or seven colors, exactly five or seven, for the theory itself does not know the exact number. One cannot express oneself too strongly, firstly, regarding the conceptual barbarism which applies the category of composition, the worst form of reflection, even to light, and makes brightness consist of seven darkness. One might as well say that clear water consists of seven sorts of earth. I'll give that a perfect 5 of 7 explanation. That's just the 5 of 7 right there, be next to each other.
Well, he's
Um,
being the high school teacher here and
yeah.
going into, you know, um how this stuff like there's a Star Trek episode where Data is deployed down to a planet and he's trying to get a piece of radioactive equipment and he
Oh,
gets damaged by it. And he happens upon the ancient, the pre-warp civilization, and they have like this lecture where they talk about earth, air, fire, water, being the basic elements and how you mix them up and stuff happens. And um, this isn't exactly like that, but it kind of reminds me of that because now we don't talk about the darkening and the lightning so much of these processes, but back then he's basically just being the high school teacher and being like, here's how this process works according to our latest science. And yeah, and there you go. And he's trying to use it to illustrate in concrete terms the logical categories of what happens with this light when it's broken into its differentiation. I want to say
actually, I'm just thinking about it. The color square, is that now the color wheel? Because
I don't know.
I have
I
no idea
couldn't
either.
tell
I
you.
can't find it.
Maybe it was a color diamond.
Yeah.
I'm kidding, or a color crystal. Okay, I'm gonna shut up because that's probably mixing things.
Maybe it's an aspect of the color wheel. I don't know. Um, One might likewise censure the ineptitude and incorrectness of Newtonian observation and experiment as no less their stupidity, and as Goethe has even shown, their dishonesty. One of the most striking as well as simplest errors in a false assertion that when a monochromatic part of the spectrum produced by a prism is passed through a second prism, it reappears as monochromatic. So, filtering to a specific color of light, wavelength of light, recreates only that wavelength of light. Huh. Yeah, because that's our way of interpreting it, not Newton's.
Yeah.
Likewise, one may condemn the equally bad character of the reasoning and proof based on such impure empirical data. Newton not only used a prism, but was well aware of the fact that to produce color by it, a boundary of light and dark was necessary. And yet he could overlook darkness as an active factor in producing dimness. This condition for color he only mentions, by the way, in connection with a very special case, and then, ineptly, long after his theory is complete. Long after his theory is
Long
complete.
after, yeah, here's the criticism of Newton
Yeah,
and his.
that's what I was mentioning. Now, I need to go back to Newtonianism and Hegel commentary. The only use made of Newton's reference to this condition by defenders of his theory is to say that he was not unaware of it, but do not see that it is an argument for treating darkness in association with light as a supreme condition in all considerations of colors. Again, not the same thing. On the contrary, the textbooks do not mention the fact that darkness is present in all color phenomena, nor the quite simple fact that a white wall or wall of one color looked at through a prism shows no color. I'm assuming talking about the entropic colors. And showed, or in the case of a wall of one color, no other color than that of the wall. If, however, a nail is driven into the wall or any unevenness is made on it,
Mm,
then, only at that spot, do other colors make their appearance. This ignoring of so many experiments which refute it must thus count as another fault of the theory.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so, um,
And that's a huge, yeah.
yeah, it's 9:01. Do you
Uh-huh.
want to cut it short here?
Okay.
We can
So,
read from the bottom of 199. Jim, if you could write this down, bottom of 199,
and the
through
same end goal.
what?
And the same end goal.
Yeah. Um, 199 through to the end of the Zuzats. I know that's a lot, but I mean, if I can read through it, I'll take some notes and like try to summarize each section instead of taking weeks to get to. Okay, 199 to 217. So we'll read it through and I'll bring a summary next time. I'll actually do some work. I promise.
No worries.
Basically the
Then we
same
can move on to
pages
the
as before.
properties of the opposition.
I I'm honestly now that I'm actually feeling a little better, I might if I can remind in fact I'll find a way to remind myself to go through some of the secondary sources on this.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, because there's so much of Newton I didn't know was actually so bad because that's how high school teaches us. Public school teaches us his stuff. It's pretty well censored. Just
Yeah.
just
Well,
the gist of it that was net that's right.
well, Hegel got a lot of his criticism from Goethe. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
and Goethe,
Yeah.
besides being a novelist and poet, was a major scientist back then too. Nowadays, mostly remembered as as a novelist and a poet, but he was also a major scientist.
Yeah, it's true. All right, comrades. I hope you have a nice week. I'll be talking to you uh um on the DMs.
Yep.
Take it easy.
Yep,
You too.
you too.